Hey there, YouTube. So in this video, which is our first viewer-requested video, we are going to talk about one of my older projects I worked on and how I did it and, how that might help with something you're working on. So this is my Vincent Valentine gauntlet, where back in my early college years, I actually cosplayed as Vincent Valentine from Final Fantasy VII. No pictures of this incident exist, except for one, and I have no idea where that young lady's at right now. So, yeah, nothing to say about that. Yeah, it. Now, this is actually not the original Vincent Valentine Gauntlet. This is from a set of four I built after the fact to sell, and as far as I can recall, I think I've sold two. I think one of my other buddies has the other gauntlet on loan. So yeah, we are going to talk mostly about the plates on the hand as opposed to the arm, because the arm is in fact just a tube. It's just a cardboard tube, and the bells are made out of paper mache pulp, which is part of why they have such a rough finish. Uh, because when I made these, I hadn't heard of Bondo and hadn't worked with that at all. Again, these projects are like 10 years old at this point, which makes me feel so old. And talking about these is going to involve a lot of, maybe not out loud verbal apologizing, but a lot of, man, if I were building this now, I'd probably do things different and or better. So let's talk about paperboard gauntlets. Something I had a marked enthusiasm for back in my late high school, early college years. I built a few costumes using these and figured out a few little tricks on building them well. Now, of course, since we're talking about paperboard gauntlets, it's worth saying these are not the sturdiest or most permanent of props, but I mean, hey, this guy saw, and actually he didn't, but the original prop saw a night of action on Halloween and sat on a shelf for a while with very little wear and tear. So again, these won't hold up to, anything, but they will hold up to a weekend of cosplaying or a Halloween night, and with a little bit of fixing up, they will sit. Damn it. They will sit on a shelf handsomely to remind you of that thing you made once. All right. So, when working with paperboard, I mean, it's super cheap. It's super easy to get a hold of. All of these are made out of just cereal boxes. Now, to get a nice curve on it without it crimping up on you, what I like to do is I like to run it along the corner of a hard-edged desk pretty gently. And you can get a nice curve without it, developing these really ugly sort of folds, which, anything you're going to make metal colored, those are going to stand out. They're going to be really obvious, and it just looks so much nicer to have a nice, even curve. Yeah, I'm not going to demonstrate because, well, I mean, you guys can try it at home for the price of a box of cereal and, or take my word for it, whatever you're feeling. For surfacing on paperboard, I typically just brush it with a couple layers of Elmer's glue. That doesn't particularly make it watertight, but it does make it sturdier, more resilient. It takes a paint finish better. And again, super cheap, super easy, which is really how I worked at that time. Now, on the Vincent Valentine gauntlets, there is a plate on the back of it. You cut out a plate in the shape you want, and then I cut out this basically C-shaped plate. Now, you can see on these guys, or, so I cut these too skinny. I didn't make them wide enough to account for the knuckle and the plate that would go underneath it. Now, in terms of Vincent's gauntlet specifically, the plate does kind of curve up into a much skinnier plate where it goes under the next finger plate. But still, when you're working on this yourself, you want to make sure you're accounting for plenty of room for that. And that's actually part of why I'm not posting any kind of templates for these, is this really has to kind of be custom made for your hand. Now, you don't really have to cut. You can basically use the same size of plate for all your fingers. Mostly when we're talking about this type of gauntlet, where it's just a lot of plates, where it's not plates specifically mimicking each joint on the finger like you'd do for, cybernetics or automail or things like that. Talking about these gauntlets specifically, where it's just a large number of plates giving a nice curve all along the finger. So a lot of medieval gauntlets will do things like that. So you can basically use the same template and cut it out as many times as you want. Particularly for these first three fingers. At least on my hands, these first three fingers are close enough in size that I could just use the same plates. And for the pinky, I did have to shorten them a little bit, but I just used the same plate and cut a little bit off the end of each one. That is important to do because if not, you will lose a lot of mobility in your pinky and it'll just kind of look weird. Which, sort of going back to these C-shaped plates on the back of them, I glued them on with hot glue. I attached the one to the other and then kind of filled in the gap a little bit with fabric paint. It didn't work out that well. And again, if you've ever used Bondo, you could use Bondo to create a nice curved bell for that, and they would look really good. I mean, just the plate on the back of them doesn't look bad, but, So let's talk about the finger plates for a sec, which this is the closest I will come to giving you guys a template. Ignore that drawing. That's from an earlier take of me trying to do this video, which actually that drawing would work just fine. But let's go through the motions here. So yeah, I've tried to do this video a couple times. Had problems with that. So with the fingertips on Vincent's gauntlets that come out specifically to a claw. You think of it like a tube coming off the end of your finger, where a tube would go straight. And if you want just a little bit of curve to the claw, you curve it down, not a lot. You don't want, you still want them to relatively be coming straight off of the end of your finger. So just a curve of, this would be a ½ inch, because this is like 1/4 inch square graph paper. Something I really enjoy using for templating things. Particularly any really small plates on any costume. And as for the rest of the plate, that was about how I designed it. You think about what you want the side of. That's basically accurate. Of what you'd want the side profile of the finger plate to be. So that is actually a little bit wider than I did these, but that is basically the pattern I used for making the claw fingertips on these guys. Of course, cutting out that little divot there. Now, on a lot of my earlier gauntlets, the fingertips were kind of the trickiest part. So actually, the long extended claw was a lot easier to do than a tight fingertip, which I don't necessarily have any specific recommendations for. That's not something I've fiddled with recently. This is a sort of project I would like to go back to at one point. I just haven't necessarily had a costume I've been doing that required that. Of course, honestly, if I did, at this point, I'd probably do more of a plastic or a metal gauntlet. If I decide to do something more Game of Thronesy or any newer cybernetics, I still want to build myself a set of automail. I just haven't quite done that yet, as I am way, way too tall to be Edward Elric. So yeah, that is a really good pattern for how I did the fingertips. Now, as for how I attached these to the glove, it was just hot glue. Now, in order to place the plates correctly, so everything worked, I did hot glue them to the glove while it was on my hand, which tended to suck and hurt a bit, but it wasn't really that dangerous, so I would advise caution if you're doing that yourself. Be sure to use a low temp glue gun, and just be careful. Don't hurt yourselves on account of the recommendations of some schmuck on YouTube. As for any other any other tips, pieces of advice, always keep in mind on particularly on a gauntlet like this, where it just has regular plates going up to the knuckle. That you do have webbing on your fingers, probably about halfway along that joint, if your hands are anything like mine. So you can't exactly have the plates coming down as far leading up to the knuckle. You kind of have to account for that, and you can see here where I did. mostly for, comfort and functionality, because if not, they'd, be sticking way further off your knuckles, and it would just not work out so well. So yeah, that should give you a pretty good idea of how I built these, and give you a pretty good jumping off point for any similar project you're working on yourself. If you have any more questions on these, I will try to answer them in the comments below. Again, I haven't tried doing any specific tip videos like this before, so I'm just sort of figuring that out, and figuring out the best format for that. Yeah, thanks for watching, guys. I'll see you in the next thing I work on.